Hey, hey, hey! Welcome to the Ordinary Radical Podcast. It's going to be a great show. We're glad to be back with you.
Well, welcome. So glad you guys are listening in. I'm your host, Jonathan Hayashi. We have our co-host,
Brandon Boatner.
Ordinary Radical Podcast is a discipleship of biblical living and featuring conversation Q&As concerning a wide variety of topics to help you grow as disciples through the local church in leadership, discipleship, and mission. What's going on?
Man, there's a lot going on. You're at youth camp right now.
Yeah, right? I'm at youth camp.
You're on location. Next week I'll be at youth camp helping out. So I thought when we became lead pastors, we could, not sweat it out for a week in the summer. What happened?
Dude, I thought too, man. In fact, I was in Nashville for the Southern Baptist Convention annual meeting, and I had to leave a little early so I could get here Wednesday night for our summer camp. We're having a great time. It's super fun, but I'm like going through like 2 or 3 T-shirts, and I just say we're just suffering for Jesus,
That's the persecution you go through. Okay, long suffering.
Long suffering.
I got you. How are you doing?
Doing good. I'm kind of losing my voice, so listeners, if you notice my voice sounds a little kind of odd or off, it's because I am hanging with students. We're having a blast. We're having a good time. We're learning from Colossians 1:15, talking about the invisible God made visible through Jesus, his supremacy, his excellency, his perfection. So it's been real cool. I mean, it's June. Were you enjoying your summer so far?
I'm enjoying my summer. So I'm doing a lot of coaching baseball and things like that. So being out in the heat, like today is it's going to be triple digits again. I don't know if you saw that. We're supposed to hit some records locally, but the sports still continue and the kids keep running. And so you get out and you have a good time with them. But no, it's going good. Church is going really good too. And I think we have a great podcast today, right?
Yeah, we do. Kind of speaking of, you're talking about doing baseball and stuff like that, and building bridges with some of our children and younger people. I thought it would be appropriate for us to talk about this topic, reaching the next generation in our churches. So I think you're kind of preaching on that even this week, huh?
Yeah, we're talking quite a little bit about it because we're into Hebrews and we're talking about not forsaking the assembly, not choosing to come to church and to attend. And one of the things I'm going to bring up is just how, especially a next generation, they think a lot differently than generations prior to them. For instance, we've seen church attendance drop. We've seen church membership drop. And the younger you are, the less likely you are to attend or become a member or become dedicated and entangled into a church a little bit. So that's tough. How do you reach those people?
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I was just kind of thinking about like you and I in our generation, there was kind of like a religious affiliation. I think I was listening to a podcast recently and they call that, like we say atheist or agnostic or Christianity. Could you kind of expand on that a bit more? Like where is our kind of 21st century where we're living right now and the religious scope of affiliation where people, land on?
Right. And so I'm part of the millennial generation. Moving forward right now, the next biggest generation, they're calling several things, but one of them, they're being associated as the nons because they're non-religious. It's not that they're against religion or even agnostic. They just don't even think about God, which is really hard for me to think about because growing up, I wasn't raised in the church, but I thought about God and I would look at the heavens and I would think, but our newest generation, they may go, weeks, days, and they just don't think about anything outside of what's right in front of them and impacting the world directly.
Yeah, I just think, I think, I can't remember who said this, but, or millennial or Gen X generations, we were kind of like in Jerusalem. But now with Gen Zs in the younger generation, next gens, they are kind of like in Babylon.
Right.
They understand the language of like even that when we use the Roman roads and I think it's a great tool to use evangelism. Mm-hmm. There's just not a knowledge there and it's just so foreign. My wife and I were just talking recently. I'm just like, back in the days people talked about gods in their everyday language, like in farming, and the gods will watch over us, and but that is just so not today. It's a big hush hush, no word, don't mention God. So for us try to relate to, when I'm speaking next gen, I'm thinking about Generation Z. I think there's a lot of statistics on that. We're kind of missing the mark, it seems like.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because a lot of our stuff is normed towards an older generation, a lot of the way we do things. And the church is not quick to change. The church is not quick to move into new types of delivering gospel and reaching people. We get stuck, so we're still using some of the methods that were good in the 90s. And when I say the 90s, that, your Gen Z, like you said, the 90s is last century to them. That's a long time ago, right? And so we got to kind of think through that a little bit, because the world and Satan in general, like he moves at a quicker pace than we do when it comes to reaching people. So the question becomes, how do we reach this next generation? How do we hold on to them, and how do we raise them up in the Lord? Like, those are like questions that I'm wondering and I'm working through in my own life.
Yeah, and I think one of the important things to think about this is, I almost sense the tension, right? It's kind of like it becomes like us versus them. It's kind of like the older people are wanting their traditions, and they're saying, the younger people they're so progressive or liberal, and they're this side, they don't get where we're at. And then, I think the younger generation, like next gens or Gen Zs, they would feel like, well, they don't really want us.
Right.
Or they would say the language, we want you. We want to reach to you, but I think first and foremost, when we're talking about reaching, we need to know where these reaching of people are. So I guess, let me ask this question: where are the next gens then? Where are the Gen Zs?
Where are they at? They're all around us. They're everywhere. What do you mean? But
churches, right?
They're not in the church. Yeah, you're right. On a Sunday morning, they're doing their own thing. Now they may be volunteering. So there's a big heart in this group, in this generation, for volunteer work, for making a difference. They don't affiliate the church with making a difference. So that's a big deal. That's a big deal, right? They don't look at the church and think, well, the church is changing the world. This is something I want to be a part of. They just think that they look at the church as it's had its opportunity and it's failed, and so that they're generally more into volunteering and doing things like that.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a gap already. Cultural values. Right? And I think these are some of the attempts that what churches have done in order to reach next generation. And I think it's a myth, and I don't think it's working. And some that comes to my mind is, in order to reach our people, we got to change our worship style. We got to look cool and kind of trendy. We got to have the look and this and that, which I guess sometimes it works, right? Or second, in order for us to reach young generation, we got to change our building. We got to have a cool building. We got to get a bigger building. We got to get big people in here, so it's attractional, it's consumeristic. Then we can reach. Or they would say like, well, in order for us to reach, then we got to get a cool hip young pastor, right, in their 30s or whatever, and they understand, and because they get them up on stage, we're going to begin to reflect that, right? And so, all these things come to my mind, as we're reaching our young generation. But I don't think younger generation is attracted to that necessarily.
Right. They don't. Well, for one, they don't have children. A lot of your Gen Z don't have children yet. So, if you're trying to do an attractional model where even if you're having like the Fall Fun Fest, the bounce houses, all that stuff, they aren't. You're right. They're not attracted to that. They're not attracted necessarily to the cool church, although that does bring some of them in the door, but it doesn't make them stick, right?
Yeah.
So the question is, what makes them stick?
Yeah, exactly. So I think this is where it's so crucial for us to talk about this, because it's like, I don't think older people don't want them, but I think as a next gen, myself and you're a millennial, I think what's a huge turnoff is, we want your presence, but we don't want your opinion. right? So we want you to come and sit and stay, but we don't want you in leadership capacity. We don't really want you to hear your voice and your opinions about certain things. And that is not very attractive, and nobody wants to stick around something like that. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. There has to be a place for them to fill in, right? A place for them to hit. Um, they're also it's hard. If you're listening right now, if you're a pastor and you're like, I want these young people, I want to reach, and you're like, but it's just hard. You're exactly right. It is. So I'll tell you something that I'm going through right now. My church is an older church, older population, not a lot of young people. I'm praying for an influx of young families and young people. We have everything in place, discipleship, everything that I would think would be successful. But what I find is the same thing that we find in churches where they're working towards multi-ethnicity and things like that. A young person comes in, looks around, sees that it's majority old people, leaves, doesn't come back because they don't feel like they fit. So what you're talking about is absolutely true. We have to have a spot for them to participate, to get involved. But we also have to work against the fact that people feel like they don't fit because there's people that don't look like them around. Because you're never going to get those people if they keep leaving. So it's a catch-22. It's really, really hard. It's a really hard subject.
Yeah. I do think, Barna Research did this kind of study on it. And one of the things that they came out is they began to study these different churches, multi-ethnic or suburban or urban or rural, different churches that are successful and growing vibrantly, healthy, financially, spiritually, in just every capacity. They noticed that they interviewed this guy named, let's say his name is Bob, and this guy was really making an impact in lives, but they found out this guy was like a 60-plus-year-old man. And it was what's up with Bob? Well, Bob is willing to meet with me at a coffee shop. He's showing up to, the football game after, XYZ time. And, so they began to ask their discipleship strategy, missional strategy, outreach strategy, how they do. And then what Bob did is crazy. He just wrote down on a piece of paper. He went to a public library. He scanned it and sent it. I mean, who scans at a public library today? But I think, the cool thing in the trend today is actually authenticity is apologetic of our culture today. And when we are willing to show how much we care, because the saying, it says people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care about them, right? So one of the things that whatever age or stage of life, whatever location, we are on mission, but when we're intentional about reaching and building relationship with these families that we know their names, we're praying for them and we're reaching out to them, I think that's the way that actually we're going to win our next generation, right?
Yeah, being authentic is definitely, but I would say that authenticity has been, ever since the millennials, really the the Gen X, authenticity has been very crucial. Before that, there was this picture of what a pastor looked like. If you think of what a pastor looks like now, it looks like you, right? So you wouldn't have been the picture of a pastor in the 50s or the 60s or the 70s. And I definitely would have with my baldness and all my tattoos. Yeah, but people look at us and they see authenticity. They see us being ourselves, and we're transformed in Christ, but we don't lose our personality. And we acknowledge real issues. That's probably a place we should go. One of the things dealing with authenticity is acknowledging real issues, right? I was in a church one time where the pastor was talking about how he more or less said that depression and things like that almost don't exist, and that they're really facsimiles of culture. But that's just not true. There's chemical issues there in the brain. There's developmental issues. There's trauma. And so to be authentic, you have to be willing to talk about some of those difficult issues. Of course, that's in context of Scripture. But tell me, I can show you, half the Psalms are laments, right? We can talk depression. We can talk trauma and things like that. So I think this next generation is interested in that type of authenticity.
Yeah, and I think one of the crucial elements that we're missing as well is that we cannot do discipleship apart from kind of what you preach on Hebrews 10:25, right?
Right.
To not neglect the assembly of believers.
Right.
I think it's crucial for us to not just have authenticity, but accountability.
Hmm.
So what do you mean by that, Jonathan? Well, let me just bring you an example. I had one time, at a church with a lady who was really depressed and discouraged and didn't feel like part of the church. And I just began to ask questions like, okay, well, where have you been for the last 6 months? We only see your family twice in the last 6 months. Well, my husband works, and we got baseball going on, and then also we got, this property away, and then we like going camping there and canoeing and this, and I just say, let me just encourage you. Like, maybe part of your being discouraged and feeling divided is because you're neglecting your part of really doing life with the church. I mean, and we shouldn't be ashamed about it, because there's 3 things brought to you by letter B. It's biblical to gather with the saints, right?
Right.
And it's beneficial. Like, you will be edified and encouraged as we sing together and as we gather together in fellowship and pray over you. And third, also, we're Baptists. It's Baptistic. Our forefathers have done this for years. But somehow I think in our younger generation, they think, what? Church is an option. Membership is not required. I don't really have to be part of the church. I really don't have to gather. And right there, we have to leverage and pinpoint and say, no, that is not the case, because it's not biblical, it's not beneficial, it's not Baptist.
That's good. That Hebrews lesson that I'll be doing on Sunday, he has 3 areas also, and the book of Hebrews is really saying Jesus is greater than all else. Therefore, because I know Jesus is greater than all else, my life should look like, or I should do this, or X, Y, Z. It's that therefore push. And in verse 22, 23, and 24 of Hebrews chapter 10, he says we should draw near with a true heart. He says, let us hold fast the confession of our hope, and let us not neglect to meet. There's the next generation has a disconnect. They look at, if they believe in Jesus, if they're curious about Jesus, they definitely don't think that he's greater than all else. They definitely don't think he's the main priority or the push of their life. They don't see that they need to draw near. They don't see how he changes hearts. They don't see how he is the confession of our hope, and how neglecting to be together it impacts us greatly. So part of what you're saying is showing them those things. But like you said, how are we going to show them those things? How are we going to teach them to come when they're not coming? You talked about that guy who's going to them. I think that's fantastic. That's a great model for a 60-year-old man. I don't have the time. You know what I mean? Like, I've got 4 sons, and I'm living life with them, and I'm doing ministry, and I am evangelizing and stuff, but don't have a lot of free nights to go hit the baseball games. And the ones that I'm at, I'm coaching. So it's more difficult than we necessarily have answers for it right now.
And I think I understand, like, what does that look like, right? I think about Acts 2:42. It says they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, in prayer, in breaking of bread. I think there's a devotion, right? And the idea of it in the Greek is koinonia. Mm-hmm. And I think koinonia comes when we begin to do life on life together. So much to the point that, Brandon, your joy becomes my joy. Your sorrow becomes my sorrow. Your grief becomes my grief, because we've done life together as a church. And that cannot happen apart from the local church. And some people say, well, I'm part of a church, but the universal church. But that's just such a non-reality. It's anti-New Testament. You just don't see that, really. And I'm just convinced that's one of the missing mark, why we're not reaching our next generation. And, one of the things practically I do in my church is that, I was like, somebody wants to spend time with me. I just say, hey, if you want to talk to me, I can't really talk to you one-on-one anymore, but you just got to come to my home. You go on a walk with my kids, or you're dining in with me. You're going to be okay seeing the mess of my house. You're going to be okay, because we can't clean up our house every time we have guests, but we're just being really authentic, but also accountable as well. You know what I'm saying? So on my weekends, how I hang out, disciple train, I reach out to this college student, but there's only my times. So I said, hey, if you want to be discipled by me, you got to meet with me at 6 a.m. We work out at the gym. So we physically working out, but afterwards we're going through the book of Galatians. We read one chapter. I ask questions. I ask application questions. And I say, how can we do this? And I'm bringing in other men in that time too. So I'm creatively thinking, how can I intentionally disciple next generation, whether students or young adults or college students or young families, right? But that's the way that we need to begin to think in the rhythm of life, right? Of not a typical and office sitting down, but trying to build these bridges, whether doing through baseball and reaching out in those stands, right? Because that's where they're at.
Yeah. So you believe, you're saying that, you're saying what discipleship is, right? To involve them into your life is a way to reach them. And I totally agree. We have to train our church to be able to do that, because you're Jonathan, you're not enough man to disciple all the people, right? You could do 1, 2, 3 maybe, but what about all those others that are falling to the wayside, right? And so our families, our the men of our church, the women of our church, the spiritual parents of our church, they have to learn how to be spiritual parents and nurture people into their lives. Yeah, but here's one area that I'm struggling with right now, that I'm hearing you say. This next generation is less committal, right?
Yeah.
But what you're talking about, being involved in your life, is very committed. Waking up at 6 a.m. is very committed. Going to work out is very committed in general, and then doing Bible, that takes a special type of person. And I'd love to meet those young people like that, but I just don't see a lot of that. So I'm trying to reach people that are not committal, that don't get committed. I'm thinking of someone right now who actually several young people right now in my church, who consider themselves members of my church and 2 other churches, and they go to whichever one on a particular Sunday that they kind of feel like, depending on when they wake up, and how do we switch something in them to where they go, okay, I'm going to commit for 6 weeks to do a study, or I'm going to commit, and I haven't seen that or been able to find that magic wand yet.
Yeah, and I think it's hard, right? I mean, honestly, I struggle with that too. But I often reminded, when I look at scripture, it comforts me through the New Testament, the gospel accounts. When I look at the disciples, they really didn't have their act together. I mean, in fact, a lot of them were pretty foolish, pretty kind of hot-tempered, right? They weren't dropouts of rabbinic school, but what they did have, they had these 3 things. I call them fat disciples. Okay, they were faithful, they were available, they were teachable. Okay. So like for me, I just look at, okay, in my areas of ministry, not necessarily because they're a lawyer or they're a dentist or they're a doctor or they have high paid, jobs, but I'm saying, okay, where they're faithful and committed, that if we call them out, they're willing to show up. Like, we were helping up a widow to clean up their house and pick up branches. He's there, he's faithful, showing up. And then I think about they're available. So I call them to the task, like, were you available this time to me? But if they are always busy, they're faithful, but they're just not available. I got a job. I'm gone on the weekends. I'm only there once in 3 months, Jonathan. Well, I know that's not the guy that the disciples are available. But also, last but not least, they're teachable. They're not always arguing with me, but they have a sense of a spirit of teachability. They're not always say, well, this person said this, and there's a sense of a critical spirit. You know what I'm saying? Critical mind is good. It's humble, but also teachable. But a critical spirit is divisive and prideful. But there's a sense that they're wanting to learn. You know what I'm saying? So I'm always looking at that, and I'm thinking, specifically next gen, but also if your senior adults were faithful, available, teachable, I bring them under the wing. Because they're not going to look at, well, you're this age, so you can't really teach me. Man, I won't be preaching on this Sunday. I truly believe immature Christians are hard to please and easy to offend.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Or the opposite. Mature Christians, or they're not hard to please, and they're not easily offended because they have the Spirit of God in them and they're willing to learn. And I need that too. Right. And how can we attract those people? It starts with the pulpit. It starts with the pastor, right? So I'm praying every day, Lord, search me, oh God, know my heart. there's any wicked ways in me, lead me in the way of everlasting. Convict me, right? So I think it starts there, but it is hard to find. But that's where we're praying Luke 10:2. Lord of the harvest, send laborers for the workers are few.
If you, just like you said, we're looking for fat, faithful, available, teachable. I think we can apply that directly to our pastorate as well. Okay, we need to be fat pastors. We need to be faithful. Be faithful to the sheep that God has put into your building. Doesn't mean that you're necessarily satisfied or that you're content or that you're not trying to be a witness and reach, but you need to be faithful to who God has put in front of you. And if you have an older congregation, then you love them well and you do the best you can with that congregation. So we need to be faithful to that. We need to be available towards opportunity. Right? So I'm available so that I'm not so stuck in my traditions and in my way that I can't pivot or shift whenever I feel the calling of God and the movement of God. When I see a couple young families come in and our church doesn't have a children's ministry, I'm going to look for some ways to figure out how to get someone to watch their kids, if that's my model. Or I'm going to invite them to keep their kids in the church, and if that's my model as well. I'm going to be available towards the calling of the Holy Spirit. And we want to be teachable as pastors. I want to know the trends. I want to know what young people feel and why they feel it. I want to read up on them. I don't want to get stuck in my own ways. And I still want to do all those things without ever giving up the gospel. So for me, I think being a fat pastor probably is the healthiest way to continue and to reach people, even though we're looking for fat people, right? So that's going to be my advice kind of on this topic, I think.
That's a good word. And I think, that as pastors too, we need to be courageous to call people out. And again, that's kind of like what Matthew 18 talks about. If they're in your flock and they're not being part of the church, they're not committed to what Hebrews 10:25 says, then we need to call them like, hey, the Lord has called us. It's clear here in Scripture, the mandate that you have a biblical imperative. Mm-hmm. And then, I guarantee you, they're going to tell you, the pastor, whoever you're listening, ministry leaders, say, you know what, you sound legalistic right now. It sounds pharisaical. And I pivot and I turn around and I say, you know what? Obedience is not legalism. In fact, when we look at like Ephesians 4, verse 15 through 23, I think, or 24, I believe, it talks about our mandate to speak truth and love and putting on Christ and putting off the old self. It talks about its holiness and righteousness. I say holiness is not legalism because we're doing unto Jesus and obedience unto Christ, right? So when people don't want to live it because it makes them uncomfortable, and it's a cost of following Jesus, obedience. And I said, it's part of what it means to be a Christian. And I unashamedly call you to three things: to attend, to give, and to serve Jesus. Why? Because when you commit to those, you tend to become a mature follower of Jesus who's learning to live, love, lead like Jesus. And that's a good thing, and the Lord is honored through that.
So as we probably close down, we're hitting around the 30-minute right now. So if you're listening right now and you've heard us give a plethora of ideas, realize that's because we don't have all the answers. We don't. We're right alongside you. We're talking through these issues, and we don't have all the answers. But what we do have is a willing heart and a desire to see the church grow, a desire to see the next generation love Jesus. And we believe that about you. Otherwise, you wouldn't have ever clicked on this link to listen to us. So just stay faithful, all right? Stay in prayer, seek the Lord, and whenever opportunities come, take them, but not at the price of the sheep that God has given you. Know that there is no magic wand. And just because you have a fall fest doesn't mean you're going to get 12 families. So, that's where I'm at right now. Where are you at, Mr. Jonathan, Mr. Hayashi?
Good word. Thanks for listening in and checking us out. If you want to check out our previous episodes, it's available on our website or on your favorite listening podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play. Go ahead and give us a 5-star review and contact us and let us know if there's any topic that you want us to cover on the Ordinary Radical podcast on leadership, discipleship, missiology and church health. We love to cover that and talk to you. Follow us on twitter.com/Jonathan Hayashi, twitter.com Brandon Boatner. So thanks for listening. We'll see you guys next time on our episode.
Bye, guys. Appreciate you.